Hello, Life Group leaders. We are beginning week 15 of Story Through the Old Testament, and we're going to be looking at one of my favorite stories in the Bible, that of Gideon. And so I'm just going to run down through the questions with you and kind of give you a little bit of commentary on those. I'm not going to hit every one of them probably, but there's some that are really extremely important in here. The first one I think is really important is question number 2. Obviously, Gideon and the Israelites were in the midst of an issue of their own making. They had begun to worship the Baals and Asherah, and as a result of that, God allowed the Midianites to come and oppress them, and would even come down and take their crops and those kind of things, and the Israelites would have to flee to the mountains. And the question number 2 is, do you think God rescues us when we're responsible for our own messes? Why or why not? Now, the reason I think that's such an important question is because I think people will normally answer the correct way, but in practicality, do they live that way? The truth is that if God didn't rescue us when we're responsible for our own messes, we would never be rescued. At all, because that's the only kind of messes that there are, the ones that we make. And you might think, well, God, look at all the mess that Job got in, and God sent that on him. But that's not a mess, because that God had purpose in doing all of that. The truth is that, God, the whole saying, God helps those who help themselves, is not biblical. The truth is, God helps those who cannot help themselves. Our sin separates us from God, and there's absolutely nothing we can do to get over that in order to be rescued by Him. And so, not only in this situational instance of Gideon, but in the big picture of redemption, if it was not for God, we wouldn't be rescued at all. And so, I think that is a critical question because, like I said, most people will answer that, I believe, correctly. That yes, God rescues us when we're responsible for our own messes. But then, is that the way we live? Do we turn to Him immediately, or do we try to fix these things that we get ourselves into on our own? I think, practically speaking, a lot of people try to correct the things themselves. You've probably heard me tell this story before, but there was a time whenever Sherry and I were in debt, and she made a comment to somebody. Well, God could, take care of this today by sending a check in the mail, but we got ourselves into this. We're going to have to get ourselves out. Well, it wasn't probably the next week we got a check in the mail that helped eradicate our debt, and that was from pregnancy debt. We paid the hospital. And so, at any rate, no matter what the situation is, we don't get ourselves out of the messes. God's the one that does the rescuing. He's the one that has come to us and rescued us out of darkness. He's rescued us out of not just complete darkness into salvation, but I believe He continually rescues us out of our own mess. And He's going to continually be saving us until we see that ultimate redemption whenever He returns. The second question that I want to go over that I think is really key is what was Gideon's first big assignment, and how did he feel about doing it? What was the result of his actions? His first big assignment was to go and tear down the altar to Baal that his father had. Obviously his family was not innocent of the idolatry that had plagued Israel at this time, and so the Lord instructed him to go and pull down that altar and use that altar, the wood from the altar, and to sacrifice the 2 bulls that his family had. There was an offering to be given to God as a result of tearing down this altar to Baal and the Asherah. And so it's an Asherah pole is what it is, and so it's a sign of fertility and a god of fertility that they worshipped. And so, how did he feel about doing it? He was scared to death to do that. In fact, he was so scared he wouldn't do it during the day. He did it in secret at night, And whenever people woke up in the next morning and found that that was down, they began to inquire who had done this, because he had torn down their God. And I think that's extremely important. And like we think from a Western mindset of idols as being these things made of wood and stone and metal that people will sit up. Kind of like Hindu people now set up their little gods, or the Buddhas. From a Western mindset, we have all kinds. People have all kinds of gods that they worship. Now, they don't necessarily physically bow down to those things, but you can tell what a person's God is if you tear it down based on how they react. Because Gideon went and tore down this altar to Baal and the Asherah pole, and whenever he did that, people just reacted in this visceral way. Like they told Gideon's dad, "Bring Gideon out here so that we can kill him." And I think anytime we attack a person's God, they're going to react in that same manner. They're going to want to come after you in order to recover their God. And so whenever we're thinking through this and talking to your groups about that, like a lot of times, like we have to ask the question, what are the gods of today? And, like there can be a lot of things. I think a lot of times people make whatever their kids are doing an idol. Sometimes they can make recreation an idol, or just leisure time. A lot of times they'll make TV, cell phones, internet, pornography, just a myriad of things. Like, there was one theologian that said our hearts are idol factories. And so, like, we are going to find something to worship. And if it's not the true God, we're going to find something else to worship. And so, maybe even a follow-up question is to have people search their hearts and tell them to ask God to reveal any idols that might be in them. Because, doggone it, we don't want to go just through all of this and just tell nice Bible stories. Like, we want to get at the heart of the issue in people's lives. And, like, we're not that much different than the Israelite people. And we have to be careful not to delude ourselves into thinking that we don't ever have to search our own hearts and we don't ever have to confess sin. Maybe there's an opportunity in your group this week just to confess. Like, I've been following this thing more than I've been following God, whatever that thing might be. And so, that was, it says here in this question, what was the result of his actions? Well, yeah, people were upset with him, but one of the other results of his actions is God gave him another assignment. And the assignment was to lead his people and to deliver them out of this oppression to the Midianites. And so whenever Gideon was obedient, God gave him another assignment, a greater responsibility. And so I think that is important too, to see how God uses those times of testing in our life to prepare us for other things to come. Okay, the last question I want to cover is, do you think that God gives us assignments that are beyond our ability to carry out in our own strength? The question is unequivocally yes. I mean, every assignment he gives us is beyond our own strength and ability. He wants us to carry out his purposes with his strength. We don't accomplish anything for God in our own power. We are to rely on him by faith. We are to cling to him, to trust in him in all things, and to trust that he's going to empower us to do those things whenever the time comes. Now, for me, the question here is, has he given you one? How do you respond when he does that? Well, I can just tell you, my life right now is that. Like, I don't feel adequate. I don't feel like I have the strength or the power to lead a church, to pastor a church, and yet that's the assignment God's given me to do. And there's not a week that goes by that I don't get on my face before God and say, I've got to have your strength. I need your help, because I can't do this on my own. There's no way I can do this on my own. Like, how do I get up and say, thus saith the Lord, and make sure I'm doing that rightly according to the word? How do I minister to people in situations that I haven't ever been in before? And so, like, how am I supposed to do that? Only by the strength of the Lord. And really, the assignments that He's given each one of us, and not just in ministry, but in life, like, how can I possibly parent my children rightly without the strength of the Lord? How can I possibly have a faithful, successful marriage without the strength of the Lord? Like, how do I get up and do anything in the day without the strength of the Lord empowering me? And so, yes, He's given us responsibilities, but we have to do this under His strength, by His strength, and by His power. And we rely on the Holy Spirit. I know that we as Baptists don't talk enough about the Spirit, but we have to, because it's only by the Spirit that we have the power to do what God's called us to do. And so I'm going to get on a soapbox here if I'm not careful, but I think those questions that I went over today are the key ones in this passage. Now, the other ones are not unimportant, but I think those three, like if you're going to key on those three, because we have to trust in God. We have to worship Him only. We have to we have to obey all the things that He's given us to do, and we have to do it by His strength. And so, anyway, that's kind of a brief overview of Gideon. I'm trying to make this video a little shorter because I know they're a marathon at times. But I hope you're continuing to love life groups and just continue to be faithful to God. What you're doing in your faithfulness to disciple other people and lead them in the scriptures and help them engage and all of those things, God's using that. I have no doubt in my mind that God is honored in what you're doing, and I have no doubt in my mind that God is working in the hearts of other people because you're being faithful and obedient to follow His command to make disciples. So have a great week. If you got any questions before you go over this particular lesson, give me a holler. And again, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'm so thankful for you and what you're doing in leading life groups. Talk to you later.